much do you think you know about college football? Well, we're going to learn a lot, so stay tuned. This is Football Frenzy. Welcome to the Frenzy, everybody. Coming in hot with a great upcoming week of college football is the Iceman Matt Freites. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube right now, the coach is not here. He is gallivanting in Florida at Disney World. So we have brought in what I consider a ringer, the man, the myth, the legend. That is Tyler Budge of CF Budge. Tyler, thank you for taking out the time, and it's just awesome to have you here. So I hope you're ready to have a little bit of fun.
Matt, thanks for having me. I am more than ready. Coming in hot. Love it. Love the intro. I'm ready to roll.
Always.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah, let's make it happen. So first thing, if you are new to Tyler at all, then you're missing the boat because he is doing great work out there in many different places doing college football work. And honestly, man, I feel like you are one of the better people who does college football work. And we need to acknowledge the fact that you just reached 100,000 subscribers on TikTok. So if you are completely unfamiliar with Tyler, right now in the show notes, there is a link to his link tree. Follow him on all the social platforms because he's going to teach you something. So congratulations on that, man. And that's a lot of hard work, and you should hopefully be celebrating it all the way to 200K.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was an awesome, surreal milestone when it actually hit, and it's owe it all to the people that care and want to listen. And I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So the 200K celebration will be just as grand.
Can I ask you a question about that little peek behind the curtain for people who don't make content? I know it's a struggle sometimes for people because it can feel like work at certain points when you're putting so much time in. And I look at you, and what you do is so tailored to what you love, which is college football. And have you ever, up until this point, gotten on the borderline of feeling that way, or is it just so ingrained in you to love college football that you'll be able to do this no matter what, no matter how much work it takes?
I think it's definitely ingrained in me to love it, and I have a really, really high threshold for how much of it I can do and enjoy it. But I did after about a year and a half of doing it, I had stretched myself pretty thin, and I was trying to do a lot. And there was a certain point where it started to feel like work, and there were things I was doing a newsletter. I had a podcast that I wasn't both feet in on. And I just had a few things where I was like, this kind of feels like work. So I kind of had to reinvent sort of what I was doing and how I was investing my time at a certain point. And I've kind of structured it to a point where everything I'm doing it because I love it, and it's not taking away from my enjoyment of it. So I definitely think there's a fine line to walk, and there's a scenario and a pathway where it could feel like work and I could be, maximizing stuff. But I just think there's a balance to be had. And if you truly do love it, there's a balance to find where it's still fun.
There is, but even when you find the balance, sometimes when you start having all these life things creep in, it's why I have so much just respect for people who do it. And even people like me and Brad, who we're not doing it nearly on the level that you're doing it, but we do it because we love it. And sometimes we get hate because we don't have the right opinion. We're not the most knowledgeable people, but the idea is that we're out here doing it. And so I think that it's worthy of shouting out as many content creators as possible because, man, it's just not an easy life.
No, it's not. I mean, yeah, people are pretty ruthless out there on the internet, and it's funny because it's something you don't really think about. And definitely before I was ever making content, I was one of those people that would go out on the internet and I would just let my opinion rip. I'd be like, this guy's an idiot. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and I wouldn't think about it. And of course, we're already getting accusations of hate out there,
Yes.
which is my favorite thing in the world. But I know we'll touch on that later as well.
We will. And just for the people that will listen to this afterwards, the comment here is CF Budge is the Boston College and UCF hate finally over. If you have never watched Budge at all, you do not know that he has a little bit of a beef, specifically with Boston College, which, by the way, tickles me because I was originally from the New England area. Understand that so many people in that area don't generally pay attention to college football, at least when the Patriots were really good, that 20-year period. So it is amusing to see you go back and forth with them. and have responses prepared for when they win big, when they lose big. It's a pleasure to see. But speaking of hate, my man, right now, last week, Brad and I did a video on the Pac 12, and you are somebody who sort of eats, lives, and breathes or has the Pac 12. And for a while after all the expansion, it was just Oregon State, Washington State, and they were hanging on, clinging to the Pac name. And all of a sudden now they have expanded. Now at this point, I think they've added 4 teams. I think they're looking to add even more. I think you did some videos on that. But the hate that we got was that we weren't really seeing the potential of the Pac 12. And so I just want to read one or two of these because some of these are very eloquently put. And it's just let me see. LMAO, what a joke of what used to be a great conference. Now it's like the WAC 2.0. So that was at least more in our favor. And the national sports talking heads have absolutely no clue how much the Pac-2 is DNA coded with the power conference's status and mindset. So I'm going to ask you, as somebody who knows a lot more than we do, what did we miss?
I think that in the case of the current Pac-12, which officially has 5 new additions now, right? There was the San Diego State, Fresno State, Boise State, Colorado State additions, and then Utah State was the one that happened in the midst of all the chaos. The allure that the Pac-12 in its current standing has is that it does not have a lot of the fluff that a lot of the other group of 5 conferences have. They're not having to subsidize as many bad programs and bad teams. There's no Wyoming, there's no Hawaii, there's no New Mexico or Nevada. Like that's the allure and that's the difference. And I've seen the sentiment like this is just Mountain West 2.0. So I would say from that perspective, it's a step up from the Mountain West. You can understand why they didn't merge, but to try and go full blown, this is power conference status, that's not true either. And in fact, I made a video that will never see the light of day because I made a video when the American Conference, the top 4 teams in there were rumored to be Pac-12. And I made a whole video talking about if they got those 4 teams, if they got Memphis, South Florida, Tulane, UTSA successfully, where would they rank? And would they be a power conference? I compared them to the Big 12 and the ACC. And by any metric, by roster talent, by recruiting class, by success in the field, by top 12 finishes, everything, the Pac-12 still would have been way behind. The only interesting conversation I think you could have if the Pac-12 does, and get a couple more good members, those American Conference teams come around, something like that happens. The only conversation you would be having is what happens if the Pac-12 is significantly better than the group of 5 conferences that remain, like the Mountain West, American, CUSA, all them, but not quite to the level of the ACC and Big 12, but they're still like getting that 5th highest ranked spot for a conference champion in the playoff every year. The other group of 5 conferences would slowly get pretty disgruntled at that. And then you might have a conversation. Are they going to add another bid? Are those conferences going to have to break off and do their own playoff? Stuff like that. But I think that's less of a possibility now that they swung and missed really hard over the last couple of days.
You've been pretty harsh, I think, on Pac-12 leadership over the last few years about missed opportunities and really pathways that they could have had to stay relevant. And again, I'm not saying that they aren't relevant now, but the idea of relevancy is, I think, what a lot of these conferences are looking to keep in this ever-changing landscape. But now, do you feel like they're almost stuck in this in-between? And I say this about like NBA teams. When you're the 8th seed in the playoffs, you're not bad enough to get a good pick. You're not good enough to actually be good. You're just sort of in the middle. And do you feel like the way that the playoff now is expanding, the way that we're going, is the Pac-12 going to find themselves in sort of almost a purgatory here where they're not going to be quite good enough to be compared to the cream of the crop, but they should have a team or 2 maybe that could be in the playoff? Like, where do you think they're going to fall when everything is said and done? And do you think leadership is doing a good enough job of trying to get them back at this point?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because on one hand, you can call it purgatory, but on the other hand, you can look at the current college football playoff structure and say, it's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. So no matter how big the drop off is, if you're the 5th best conference, you're going to be getting a team in every year. So I think something that I predict will happen, there's going to be a change in philosophy. We're not going to be talking group of 5, power 4, or group of 6, whatever it would be, in 10 years. Instead, we're going to be talking more like college basketball talks, like, hey, that's a 2-bid conference. Hey, that's a 1-bid conference, stuff like that. And I think the Pac-12 and the American, where they currently stand, would both be like 1-bid conferences, or consider that. And in college basketball, it's not like a rule. The Big 12 doesn't have to get multiple teams in, but it's considered a multi-bid conference because every year it gets multiple in college basketball.
So that's a good point, and that's why we have this comment here about mid-majors sort of. And there's really, it's hard to make that equivalent for football because football is so different and they play so few games. The game is so rough, and the margin for error is so small for schools, even in the new playoff term. But so the other question that I have is, obviously as a creator, you are of a certain mindset when you're making your content. You are down the middle, even though some of the fans we've already seen think you're not. But as an actual fan, because you were a fan before you were CF Budge, and you lived the Pac-12, does the real Tyler Budge have a different opinion emotionally about where the Pac-12 has gone?
Yeah, the real Tyler Budge, and honestly, I'm pretty transparent about my emotions regarding the Pac-12 on CF Budge as well. I'm sad. I'm sad that the premier West Coast Conference is never going to be premier again. The Pac-12 will probably never be as it once was, and it's just not good for the West Coast brand and West Coast football. And it's something that I've noticed, and that I didn't notice when I was a kid and would watch football, and that's that people in the South and people not on the West Coast, they don't even consider the West Coast to be playing the same sport. They don't take it seriously at all. I went to the LSU USC game in Vegas this year, and the LSU fans were talking like as if there wasn't another team on the field. Oh, it's Southern Cal. Oh, the soft. And then they lost. And even after they lost, hearing them talk, they were just like, oh, we're just a bad team this year. It has nothing to do with, we couldn't have been actually beat by those guys. So it just sucks to me that, there's that smug attitude about the West Coast, and then the West Coast kind of collapses on itself like a dying star.
Well, some of that is media driven because the East Coast bias, people have been complaining about that forever, but it's true. I mean, it's definitely true. You see it in the Heisman a lot, where it's so difficult for a guy that plays on the West Coast who isn't seen as visually or as easily as a lot of these other guys would be on the East Coast that have a noon game, let's say. I mean, at some point in my life, I would have stayed up for Pac-12 after dark, right? But at my age now, where by the time we get done with this, I'm ready for a good snooze. And then the Pac-12 is just kind of gearing up. But when you're on the West Coast where you are, you get a much easier avenue to be able to do that. And I think you've kind of hit that spot on. But it's funny hearing that from LSU, because Brad and I have been a little critical of Brian Kelly this year and a little critical of LSU. But we're going to get to that, because the Pac-12, I think, is still it's growing, it's evolving, and even though it will not be what it was, it at least will continue. So I guess you can take some solace in the fact that you will at least get to see Pac somewhere on a field in a championship game somewhere along the way. And wouldn't it be amazing if one of those schools actually won the whole damn thing?
It would be glorious.
So let's talk top 25. Do you have any issue? I asked this of Brad last week, but I think you are perfect to answer this. Or do you have any issue with Texas being number one right now?
I think I did have slight issue with it initially, because I was kind of like, Georgia. Like, we've seen Georgia struggle in Lexington before. It's a rivalry game. Kentucky will come to play. And that was what the knock on Georgia was. And then it was Texas got the win at Michigan. I kind of almost had an issue with it, because I was like, is Michigan that good this year? Like, what are we talking about? But then Michigan goes and beats USC. And I think the main thing that we don't see voters do is age wins either poorly or well. Like, a lot of the voters, I guarantee you, didn't like look back and think like, oh, that win just aged a lot better. Like, but they, to be fair, already had Texas at number one because it's reactionary in nature. But I actually am rocking with it now. I'm like, Texas has the better win at this point. Obviously, it'll figure itself out. Those guys play each other. Georgia plays Bama this weekend as well. So it'll all work itself out, and it's really semantics, but I'm okay with it in the meantime.
But Texas kind of finds themselves in an interesting predicament, because obviously Quinn Ewers, guy that got you to the dance last year, was still playing well early this year. He goes down, and Arch Manning comes in, and he looked good in the half that he played in his first game, and then he was okay, I think, against ULM. It's not as if that's a juggernaut of a program, but do you think that they can survive without with Arch Manning at the helm. I mean, obviously he's a Manning, he's got immense talent, but he doesn't have the game reps. And do you think they could be in trouble, or do you think Quinn Ewers will make his way back and Sark and the boys will have it rolling and have no issue making the playoff, even if they don't win the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas can thrive without Quinn Ewers. I think their Arch Manning can 1000% hit his stride and make stuff happen. Yeah, his first full start against ULM, he makes a couple mistakes. He turns the ball over a couple times. It's probably going to happen. They're probably opening up the playbook. We're playing ULM. Like, you can just sling the rock, maybe not necessarily open up the playbook, but letting him play free. And from what I've seen and what everybody's seen, Arch is a dude. And that dialogue we saw a year ago with like the Texas spring game and talking about if he didn't have the name of Manning, he would have been a 3-star. Just the stupidest stuff ever. I think Texas has the best quarterback room in the country. So I think they can thrive with Quinn out.
The depth in and of itself is just such a luxury to have. And for Sark to be able to build this program, I said last week that it's amazing how Sark went from where he was and sort of disgraced at one point, and to be able to turn down the Alabama job to say, I'm good, I'm going to stay right where I am. It kind of speaks to what he's been able to build there and the longevity that seems to potentially be there as well. Because if you have a guy like Quinn Ewers who you can still rock with this year, and then next year, you know what you have, assuming that he stays, of course. In the NIL world, there's no guarantee. So Texas looks pretty good. But if you look at the rest of the top 10, we'll talk about the top 25, because I think you recently did, I don't want to say you did a victory lap. We'll say you did a victory saunter about some of the teams that you were initially down on heading into the season. I believe Oklahoma was one of them. I believe Notre Dame was another one that you weren't as high on. That's why Brad's not here. But if you look at, let's take the top 10 right now, because I think the top 10 looks pretty solid. Most of the teams have looked pretty good. Who's the most vulnerable team or teams that you look at in the top 25 right now?
Well, I was going to mention the Oklahoma schools and Notre Dame again, but let's not rub salt in the wound, and we can talk about some of maybe the less obvious teams that I think are vulnerable. I'm really, really concerned for Utah right now. I picked them to win the Big 12 in the preseason, but it is like deja vu. We're getting the exact same Cam Rising thing where every week we're being told he's a game time decision. He's going to be healthy. He's going to be fine. And then we get to the game and he's out. And it's happened 2 weeks in a row now. He's been a quote unquote game time decision. And it's because they don't want the opponent to know whether or not Cam Rising's playing. And then Isaac Wilson comes out. He's been all right. They have a championship level defense, but I'm so concerned because this is exactly how Utah's season went last year. And the backup quarterback got hurt suddenly, and then they fell apart, and they were losing terrible games towards the end of the year. So I'm really concerned about Utah right now. If I had to pick one, and that's a top 10 team too, so that's a bonus.
Is there something that could be going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, or is he still recovering from this injury? Because obviously the gruesome nature of his injury in the Rose Bowl is one thing, but most athletes make it back by now, especially at that level. So could there be something else going on? I don't want to say in a political sense, but is there a struggle behind the scenes, whether it's with quarterback coach? We've seen that in other places. Kawhi Leonard in the NBA not wanting to come back and stuff. I don't want to start any drama. It's all speculative, but is it possible?
From what I've heard, there's obviously the speculation that I've seen people speculating that he just wants to embezzle NIL money and he's just like ticky-tacky injuries or whatever. But I don't think any of that's true. But what I think is happening is very much a Kawhi Leonard type situation where Cam Rising, because he's now a paid, technically semi-pro, whatever athlete, and he has his own agent and his own trainer and all those guys, his team and his camp is saying he's not ready to play. And Utah's guys are saying he's ready to play. And so the people that have more of a vested interest in Cam Rising's future career as a football player are being more cautious. And that's the way I've gathered it based on everything Kyle Whittingham says. I think it has more to do with that. And you can sense frustration from him sometimes, even though he's a very veteran, usually deadpan coach. A lot of the times his phrasing will be like Cam's guys or, he's not ready to play. So you got to sort of read between the lines, but that's the way I've interpreted. I'm not sure if that's what's happening this year, but it feels eerily similar to last season's saga.
This is something I think you have been worried about with this new shift in the way that college football looks. Because I know I hate using the word purist because that sort of puts you in this place where you're not open to change or some of that. And that's not really you, but you have said, I think even on this show a year ago, that will miss what college football used to be. And now we're seeing more stories like this, one of which we'll get to a little bit later. But you're kind of hearing a lot of these rumors about these players who are taking more power back for them. And it's turning less into what college football used to be. Is this I mean, it is, but is this just the start of this byproduct of what this new paradigm looks like, or is this a one-off?
I mean, it's gonna happen. I don't know if it's gonna become like an epidemic where it's happening super frequently and it's just plaguing the sport, but it's going to happen, and it's going to happen probably every season here and there, and you're just gonna have to get used to it being a story and it being an occurrence because the players have a lot more rights basically, and the teams can take more liberties with being cold and calculating with the players as well. It's like a two-way street, like the Colorado thing where Coach Prime basically caused a mass exodus. So it's kind of like something you just got to get used to because it's not going to go away. But I don't think it'll get like out of hand. I think once it becomes clear there's an issue in one way or another, something will be done and something will be remedied to a degree. But you just got to get used to it.
It's just fascinating coming from Cam Rising because normally NFL quarterback prospects are on the younger side, whereas he's obviously older when it comes to entering the NFL. So trying to save or I guess keep his prospect high when you don't have any game film is also quite the gamble because that's what the NFL scouts are kind of looking for. So it's just interesting because you'd think you'd see this from a guy who felt like he was a guaranteed first rounder, guy who could really come in and really make a difference in the NFL. And I mean, I'm not saying Cam Rising isn't that guy, but it's been so long since he's played, it's harder and harder to sell that. So that camp is certainly taking a risk doing it this way. But so they're your most vulnerable. So now we have the whole top 25, maybe even out of the 25. Who's a sleeper?
If I was going to go in the top 25, I was going to go with Iowa State. Cyclones were my sleeper in the offseason. And we're in a good spot. They won the Cy-Hawk Trophy. We haven't done anything yet. There's still a lot of season to go, but pleased with what I've seen from the Cyclones up to this point. And outside of the top 25, another Big 12 team, UCF, undefeated. I think they're a very underrated team, and looking forward to seeing them against Colorado. And, of course,
yes. This was from earlier, but it's perfect that you said that because the comment here we have is, why do you hate UCF, when he just said that they are a sleeper? And I feel like one of the cool things about this new playoff format is that you can have a few more sleepers, teams that feel like they could make a little bit of a difference later on. Doesn't necessarily mean that they could make a difference when it comes to winning the national championship, because I think there is just a lot of factors that go into that. But one of the things Brad said is that we've never seen a team have to do what a team is going to have to do to win the national championship this year. And so while we think we know, we don't, because we haven't seen a team actually have to do this. These coaches have not really had to go through the grind of playing at the high level of competition that's going to be needed in the playoff. And so I think you're going to see more of these teams. And what makes me sad on a personal note is at one point in time, Virginia Tech could have been one of those. And unfortunately, they stink.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest disappointments on the season so far has been Virginia Tech's utter flop out of the gate. And then they just got at the Rutgers upset, quote unquote upset. That was very predictable to see, especially after what had already happened versus Vanderbilt. It was sort of like, it feels like Greg Schiano's boys are going to march in here and win. And they did. But I've been very disappointed by Virginia Tech. I really thought that the Hokies were going to make a run this season.
This hurts me because I will be honest with you. I was there during what I would consider a heyday when it was a given that we were going to be good. It was just a how good kind of a thing. And we always knew we were going to blow the biggest game of the year, but it wasn't quite like this. And so heading into this season, I kind of lost my cool a little bit. I got excited. I got hyped for a team that I haven't been as hyped for in a very long time. And I'll tell you what, man, that Vanderbilt game, I haven't felt that into and emotional about a game in a very long time. And I said, this is the start of what's going to be another mediocre season. And I don't know if you agree or not, but in my opinion, with the amount of people that have come back on that team, all the expectations, when you look the way they've looked through 4 games, and I'm talking about slow starts, That to me is a reflection of the coaching staff.
Big disappointment, obviously, with the returning production numbers they had. I mean, they had a very similar profile to what Iowa State had in the
Yeah.
offseason, which is why I was high on them. Very high returning production numbers, sound coaching staff, or so we thought. But what I will say about Virginia Tech, and I think the same thing about NC State, I think one of these two teams is going to do this. There is so much mid in the center of the ACC right now and so much
No.
chaos that one of those teams that is well coached, I think, is capable of riding the ship. And it's just going to be like you look down at the end of the season and you're like, oh, Virginia Tech turned in an 8-win season, or whoa, NC State won 8 games this year. I think one of those two schools is going to make that happen, but I'm not sure which and I'm not sure how. So maybe you can hold on to that.
But the second half for Virginia Tech in almost all of these games has looked vastly different. So we've seen the potential. If they could play that way, even for 3 quarters, not even asking for 4 quarters, but just 3 quarters, I feel like this team could at least be 3-1. And even in the wins that they've had, they haven't really looked impressive. And it's sad because it goes to show you that on a year-to-year basis, especially in college, so many things feel like they aren't guarantees. Only certain programs get that ability to sort of feel like they're going to be good all the time. But let's talk about some teams that are good, because that makes me really, really sad. But you're looking at the top 10, and there's 6 or 7 teams in the SEC that are sitting pretty in the top 10. Obviously, not all of those can. I mean, I guess they could all make the playoff, but it's obvious that they're not, because they could. But the idea is that some of them are going to play each other. They're going to see that. But when I look at these teams, and you look at the top 10 specifically, especially all those SEC teams, what are some teams, you can name a few if you want, that you feel like right now look good but are least likely to actually make the playoff because over the course of the season, their talent level is just not what it appears to be through where we are now?
Among the SEC teams, you're saying?
Just in general, because I mean, there's a lot of SEC teams, but obviously there's going to be more. We're going to see some jockeying. But if you're looking at, say, the top 15, top 20, those are the teams that are obviously in the running now. What are some teams that are there and you're looking at them thinking there's just no way they're going to be there at the end?
Well, there's 2 that aren't in the top 15 that I'll start with and address. And they're 2 Big Ten teams that are off to a fun start, Illinois and Indiana. People need to chill out on those 2 teams. Illinois has been a very pleasant surprise, very pleasant.
Yes.
They beat Kansas. They upset Nebraska. It was awesome. Luke Altmaier looks great. Barry Lunny Jr. quietly had one of the best Big Ten passing offenses, which is a low bar, but still good cooking there. And it's been fun to watch. It's really been fun. But Penn State is about to absolutely squash those guys this week, and that's a little bit of a spoiler for later. And then with Indiana, Indiana has beaten like 4 of the worst teams ever. And I've got people telling me like they're winning 10 games this year. Like I just bookmarked
places.
Exactly. And I'm so baffled. They literally, who they played and beat, they beat the worst FCS team, Western Illinois, who I don't think has won a game in 2 full seasons. They beat FIU and Charlotte, who are both just nearly the worst in the entire FBS. And then they beat UCLA, who is arguably the worst power conference team. Maybe not because Houston exists, but it's just, I'm so confused how people are impressed by that resume. And like Indiana right now has more buzz than a team like Washington State, who has 2 significantly better wins, and a team like UCF that I already mentioned that has a win over TCU. And I'm just completely baffled by the hype they're getting right now. So those are the 2. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, where do you think some of this hype comes from? Like, because I mean, obviously, in some way, it's to get people to watch and get some sort of a reaction. But I mean, Tyler, at some point in time, we have to have reason, we have to have logic, and we have to use the data that's in front of us. Illinois, as you said, a pleasant surprise, but they've had some good wins. They've looked good in the wins that they have had. I mean, I picked them to lose this past week, and boy, I mean, they ended up coming back and winning a thriller. And it's like, we have some friends, obviously Brad's from Illinois, so we know quite a few people who are rocking with the Illini these days. And those people can be unabashedly happy about where they are and think natty or bust. But when the national media comes out, and I think you've even been critical of them, where's the disconnect when you come to these? Because Indiana, I've no joke, been sent 3 or 4 reels about Indiana's a sleeper in the Big Ten. And I'm thinking, where?
No, absolutely not. I mean, With Illinois, I'm way less upset about that. I'm not even upset. They get the quality wins. You respect it. That was a great Nebraska team they beat, and a solid Kansas team that has a couple early losses now. With Indiana, like I think what you've got is a combination of a starved fan base, an exciting new coach, Kurt Signetti. He was great at James Madison. You know, some people were giving them buzz and hype this offseason. There's just a few things there, but and then they've won in blowout fashion in all their games, but it's because of the bad teams they played, and because they've won in blowout fashion, I've noticed a lot of rating systems getting super like inflated and high on them. So like they're like in like the top 30 in some of these rating systems right now, and I think that's all just combining for a media hype storm surrounding Indiana football, which I assume will die down as they lose. They, to me, and this might age bad, I don't think it will. They, to me, feel like the most obvious 4-0 team that goes 1-7 in conference play and then misses a bowl game. Like that's what they feel like to me right now. So
love your headset. Also love that you said, I don't think it will. I mean, and that is awesome, especially if it doesn't come to fruition. We have it right here live that you are. True. I love the confidence though. I mean, you have the evidence to back it up. So the SEC, the Big Ten probably are considered the best conferences. Brad was really high in the Big 12 coming in because he kind of felt like it was a lot of B-tier teams, but there was a lot of solid teams across the board. And that's why coming in, I was worried about Colorado because I thought their schedule is harder than it was last year. And they're not going to be able to just skirt by with Rolexes and all that kind of stuff. They're going to actually play some ball this year. And so the Big 12 obviously looks good. But if you had to kind of rank these conferences, or right now, a conference that isn't named the SEC or the Big Ten that you think is really killing it right now and that's sustainable, would it be the Big 12? What would it be?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a hierarchy right now, it would be SEC at the top, and then I think the Big Ten was looking a little sketchy in the offseason in terms of like where's their top teams outside of like Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State. But now Michigan and USC look legit, and you've got obviously the little Indiana, Illinois stories. And then Iowa looks good. Nebraska looks good. I think they got a Big Ten is still clear cut number 2, but number 3, I feel like this season is pretty clearly the Big 12, just because of how much some of those ACC teams that were getting a lot of hype have flopped. You obviously have Miami that's there. Yes. Clemson's offense looks a lot better now, so maybe they could contend. But outside of that, it's like the teams that people were banking on to give that conference depth. Virginia Tech we talked about, NC State we talked about, Syracuse just lost to Stanford, Georgia Tech after a fun loss is getting beat up, or a fun win is getting beat up. Florida State is the elephant in the room. Just like the fact that they're not only not good, but like not elite, they're straight up bad is so hilarious. So like
let's dive into that, because that to me is very fascinating. Like, generally speaking, when you see such a drastic turnaround, there has been a just massive leaking of the ship, right? The ship is sinking, and normally there are sanctions to go along with that, or something super, super drastic. But this is a team, they complained all off season, the fans I'm talking about not making the playoff. And we made fun of them when they lost to Florida State. And then when they lost again, we made fun of them. And then by 0-3, it was like, okay, these people need a therapist. Like, this is crazy. Like, what is happening in Tallahassee right now? And is Mike Norvell's job, is it safe?
And you might have heard this sentiment before, but I think it's become the widely believed reason. Of course, I'm reading the chat. Mr. Pies a lot is asking.
Yeah, that's right. By the way, this person, Thomas, would love a shout out from you. You're one of his favorite creators. So before we eviscerate Tallahassee and what's going on there, just want to give a shout out to somebody who needed a little pick me up. And yes, we are reading the chat, but go ahead, my friend.
Thomas, shout out to you. Let me know who your favorite team is, and maybe we can give a little snippet on that after we eviscerate Tallahassee. But for Florida State, I think the widely held belief is that Mike Norvell just got way too portal happy in the transfer portal, and he neglected reinforcing through high school recruiting, which is what has long been proven to be the much more stable, effective way. And they just missed on a lot of places, and a lot of places where they thought they hit. And that includes the defensive front that looks scary and just gets bullied by everyone. That includes the quarterback. They thought they got a guy in DJ that looks great in a great system at Oregon State with a bunch of great weapons around him. and they just whiffed on so many things. And it's just so interesting that so many people felt so differently about Florida State. Like they did a entire story about Florida State's defensive front being one of the best in the country. And then we just watched Georgia Tech murder them. And then we watched Boston College murder them. And it's like, what is happening right now? It's just so crazy to me that so many people can be on the same page about a team, and then it's just completely the opposite. And I think that's a symptom of the transfer portal.
Which, by the way, is something I think that Coach Prime has been criticized about in only using the transfer portal, not doing more traditional recruiting. Look, the transfer portal is great, and the transfer portal can help you fill some gaps, but the old adage of getting in living rooms and talking to parents, talking to these kids to come in here, it still is necessary, and you have to build always from the lines out. And for Florida State to miss this bad, I mean, I would assume Mike Norvell gets another pass unless they go. Is there? I mean, I guess unless they go winless, there's a conversation to be had. But I think he gets at least this year to do it his way, and then we talk about it.
I don't think they'll go winless. I think they'll still find a way to scrape
No,
out some games. But even if they miss a bowl, he's got another year at least to. All right, let's see him through, hear him out. They still remember that undefeated season, almost undefeated season.
they certainly do, and that was something that Kirk Herbstreit heard a lot about when they were in Dublin about all of the comments that he made. But I'm telling you, man, this year, Brad said it was the most exciting college football season to date because of so many different things. And I think so far there's been a lot of intriguing storylines. I think we've seen some surprises, and I have been at least, I don't know how you feel about it, but I've been very entertained by what I have seen. And I think the group of five, we've talked a lot about the power conferences, but the group of five, I know you always like to highlight teams and games in the group of five. And obviously Notre Dame got hit by the group of five bug with Northern Illinois, who then of course goes on to lose when they finally get a ranking next to them. But how do you feel about the group of five this year and with the expanded playoff and obviously you've seen some results? Do you feel like there is a possibility of one, maybe even two teams making the playoff?
Well, before I get into it, shout out to Northern Illinois head coach Thomas Hammock. Bought one of these puppies in the offseason, and then left me
Oh,
a
wait,
$10.
really?
I'm not even kidding. Yeah, he did.
That is
He
excellent.
he purchased the magazine in the offseason, which was awesome, and he bought the digital version too after he already had the physical copy. So
What a
the
guy.
dude is awesome, and he follows me on Twitter too. So he's a fan. He's a fan.
What a guy.
He could be watching this right now for all we know.
Doubtful, but you should make an NFT so you can get it. He can have it three different places. He can
Yeah,
have, all of that.
true that. Maybe we can bring NFTs back in full force.
No, we'll see.
But basically, I made a long form video about the possibility of two group of five teams in there. I think it was just a week ago, and then
Yeah.
last weekend happened, and I honestly think that fell apart pretty quickly because NIU was a good candidate. They lost. How's it going, Carter? From the chat. Toledo lost to Western Kentucky, which that was another team that had a big time win they had to hang their hat on, and Memphis fell as well. And now
Yep.
we're talking about the UNLV Sluka situation, which I understand we'll touch on as well.
I mean, go for it now if you want, because it's relevant. I mean, it's relevant to something that we talked about even earlier about Cam Rising. I mean, this is a little bit more overt, and also maybe not for you, but out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, out of nowhere. And basically what my summation for my group of five thoughts is I think they would have had to put together a super compelling set of teams to get two in because the committee's already going to have a power conference bias. You're going to need the perfect combination of a 3-loss unimpressive ACC champion and like an undefeated Memphis with win over Florida State and an undefeated UNLV with 2 Big 12 wins and a win over Syracuse because they still play Syracuse. They would have been one of the best chances. And I don't think we have that anymore. And then, yes, the Sluka news, Matthew Sluka, there's an NIL disagreement. And by the time it's time for a red shirt, he redshirts and he's out. And it's crazy.
That blew my mind. I mean, I guess it blew my mind because in my old school sentiment of you've already started playing and you've already committed to this team, you're already seeing success, and to just duck out. And again, within the boundaries of what has been set up by the NCAA. So it's not as if he's doing something nefarious here, but it really tickles that like get off my lawn feeling that I have sometimes about like,
Yep.
dude,
Yep.
you just let your teammates down. But I also understand both sides of it.
Yeah, I think so. Last season, this happened, but like obviously nothing this high profile. This happened like week 4 or 5 when guys had hit their maximum amount of games to redshirt. If they weren't getting the playing time they liked, if their team was really bad, if whatever was happening, guys were redshirting all over the place and hitting the portal. But it wasn't a big story because it was just backups. It wasn't anyone cared about. And now it's happened with a very important guy. And so I saw people freaking out because then UNLV's fourth string running back or whatever also redshirted. And people were like, what's happening at UNLV? But it's like, okay, that's kind of not. With the Sluka case, though, it's something we hadn't seen before, which is a guy with everything going great. And the one reason he enters the portal is because of money, because he's
Yeah.
not getting his money. There's some dispute, whatever it was. And I do think long term, it could end up being a good thing for the sport, because I know an issue from the student athlete's perspective, if you can still call them that, is that there's been a lot of like sketchy NIL contract stuff where colleges know they can get away with phrasing it a certain way, doing it a certain way. Like the report I heard was that he was promised 100K
Yeah.
and he was only given $3,000 up till today. And now UNLV is saying, hey, we didn't have it in writing anywhere that we had to give him 100K or something like that. So I feel bad for the players, and I feel bad for Sluka because he's going to be painted as a villain for this situation. And I feel like if I was in his shoes, I'd be upset over $97,000 that I thought I deserved. And I hope long-term that this leads to more solutions for stuff like this.
Yes. And I feel like we're also still in, I don't want to call it a wild west of all this, but it still is relatively in its infancy with the way that this is going. I mean, I feel like every year there are continued growing pains and there's little loopholes and nuances to all of this that end up coming out that we, the casual fans, end up seeing and then have questions about. And that's why I love doing what we do here, because you can kind of talk through some of this. And that's why I'm willing to admit that, like I said, my old man sentiments when it comes to, well, you play for your teammates, but also the business sense of it. And that's what it comes down to now. These players are businessmen. And honestly, it is what it is. I mean, for a
It
lot of
is what
people,
it
it's
is.
uncomfortable. But look, I agree with you. If it was my son and he was a handshake deal for 100K, look, verbal agreements, they hold up in court. And so if you were promised something and the coach saying, well, it didn't come from me, well, then you better go get that assistant coach and say, stop offering 100K to our star players, because that's a problem. So it sounds like it's a little institutional control with UNLV
Yeah.
coaching and how they offer these players, because you have to know, and the coaches are learning through it. So we'll see what happens. Maybe UNLV will have a new assistant coach this offseason who is not willing to just give away money on the sideline.
Seems like a smart move that they should make.
Yes, but he can't end up anywhere this season, right? So his season is over. He's redshirted. He has to wait until next year. But this kind of brings up the group of five and the transfer portal. Now, the transfer portal obviously has helped out a lot of power conferences, like we talked about, filling gaps and so forth. And players now, though, I think you even said this last year, that no longer does a player have to sit on the bench and wait for playing time if they don't want to. There is playing time now to be had through the transfer portal. And I think the group of five schools, they offer an opportunity for a lot of these, especially like quarterbacks, right? But a lot of players to go and get reps, get playing time. And do you think that some of the upsets that we've seen in the group of five is because you're seeing some of that talent, not totally, but a lot more spread out through a lot of these schools, to where it's no longer the kind of disparity talent-wise it used to be?
Yeah, I definitely think something that was already happening was the amount of talent spread there was in high school recruiting was increasing with more people uh, getting involved and playing. And I think the group of five was already benefiting from that. And I think that NIL and the transfer portal has now allowed for those group of five programs to offer something unique. And in some cases, they're able to offer disproportionately more money to their top player than a power conference team can do, because they're going to be spread so thin trying to satisfy a bunch of guys that feel like they're a power conference caliber guy. The group of five could say, we're just going to go all in on this one guy, this Matthew Sluka guy. Apparently they weren't all in on, but
No.
I think that's been a positive side effect. And you can see it. Some of these group of five teams are able to have some real juice and some real talent there. there's also the negative side effect that you have a great season and then your roster can just get shredded. The power conference teams can go, oh, thanks for developing those guys, by the way, and we're going to take that. And then it can all fall apart. So there definitely, I think, is less stability, but there's more opportunities for them to make stuff like that happen.
Do you think that they should just chalk it up to the cost of doing business now, where if you're a group of 5 coach and you're getting some of these players, developing them, you kind of know that a lot of them, especially if they really ascend, are just going to get poached from some of these big schools, and you just have to kind of recruit that way? Or do you think they look at it as trying to keep them all of their eligibility?
Just depends. I mean, some coaches can successfully keep them. You look at Colorado State; they made a big deal about that. Torrey Horton, Fowler Nicolosi, their quarterback and receiver, they were able to get those guys back despite allegedly them getting like 6-figure, 7-figure offers for power conference teams. So, some coaches really put an emphasis on that and try to keep everyone home, but it's hard. It's hard to do. And we even saw there was the case where I believe it was Georgia State's head coach left and took the linebackers position at South Carolina because he was tired of it. He was tired of developing guys and then just watching them get poached away. And so it's not for the weak of heart. It's not for the faint of heart in the Group 5 level. Like, your roster can and will get stripped, and you've just got to be ready for it and ready to respond. And if you have a good culture and you are recruiting the right guys, it might happen less.
That's a good point that you make. The reason I bring up the group of 5 is because you talked about mid ACC teams and JMU putting the spanking on UNC at Chapel Hill. And I just was tickled by that game. I mean, first of all, if you hammered the over, congratulations to you, because you were a big winner in that game. But JMU, I don't think they're still ineligible for the playoff, correct? Because they're still in that sort of dark period where they've just transitioned over. Or are they eligible this year?
They're eligible. Okay,
good.
Year. Yeah.
And do they have last year? They got a lot of talk because they started so fast, and all the talk was that they weren't eligible. But do you think they are a team that could be a group of 5 that we could see kind of near there, or was that 70-50 win sort of an aberration for them?
I think it could have been a fluke. I'm not necessarily buying that Bob Chesney, former Holy Cross legend, turned them around that quickly. But they could. I mean, I'm just significantly higher on Texas State out of the Sun Belt. I'm higher on Louisiana out of the Sun Belt. I really like the way Coastal Carolina has looked. But James Madison, that was a pretty emphatic win. You can't ignore that. So
no.
I think my stock is certainly higher. But there's also an earlier game this year. I think it was against Gardner-Webb. They won 13-6. So something you don't talk about, James Madison. But like, I think that, and then, that was just a whole bizarre situation. Did you see the Mac Brown resignation offer?
Yeah.
Offered to resign after the game. I totally missed that. And then saw somebody say something about it on Twitter. And I was like, Mac Brown offered to resign after that game. So it almost feels like there might be something weird going on with North Carolina. But
Mac Brown isn't young.
No, he's not. And retirement rumors swirl every single offseason with him.
Obviously, and good for him for still coaching, but I just had to bring that up because they're a group of 5. So I just want to tell everybody who's in the chat, because the chat is kind of popping right now. There's a lot of questions, so we're going to change things up a little bit. We are going to put some of these questions up for Tyler to ask, because I do want to make sure we get to some of these. So I'm going to make sure that we go through, although the one comment about somebody being where they are in the bathroom, we don't need to see that. So congratulations. Hope that goes well for you, but not something that we have here. All right. So one more thing before we get to some of these questions, or 2 more things actually. So underperformers and overperformers. If you had to take one team for each of those categories, who would it be?
One team for each of those categories.
There's many, I'm sure, but
yeah. I would say the main underperformer, and how I would evaluate that to me would be the team I'm most disappointed in. With Florida State, I'm not necessarily disappointed. I think I'm actually more disappointed in Virginia Tech.
I hate you. I knew you were going to say that. I just knew you were going to say that, but also completely fair criticism. And I'm disappointed. You know what? You're right. I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. And that was the worst thing to hear from your parents growing up, is that they were disappointed in you. So you know what? They deserve to hear it from you.
It absolutely is. And then, biggest overperformer. Interesting, but let's give the Pac-2 some love. I'd say Washington State. I was very impressed. I'm very impressed with how John Mateer looks. He is an electric player to watch. I was not familiar with his game, admittedly. I I thought that Eckhouse could still start there, and I was kind of back and forth between those guys. But John Mateer is an electric runner, an electric passer, like the perfect Washington State quarterback, seemingly. And wins over Texas Tech and Washington already. If they can somehow find a way to win on the blue turf this weekend, my goodness, you look at the rest of their schedule and you go, where are the losses for Washington State? So they've been pretty big time overperformers this season.
Is it fair to say that Michigan has sort of overperformed in a way? Because, like, obviously, the way that the last season goes, they win the national championship, they lose their head coach. I think you were not as high on the hire because it was an internal guy, a little bit kind of like, all right, we'll see how this goes. And obviously, they look shaky in their first few games, but they pull off a big win against USC. And again, I say overperforming, not as if we thought they were going to be bad. So 3-1, I think, is kind of where they should be. But there's going to be a dip from winning a national championship and the roster that they had last year. And I do think that Sharon Moore is maybe overperforming for what some people might have said was going to be a disappointing season by comparison.
I think Michigan is performing.
Okay.
I don't
That's
think it's pretty much what I expected. I
Okay.
think they have a pretty firm ceiling this year at like making the college football playoffs, maybe winning a game or two. They don't have what it takes to win the whole thing this year. Their offense is too lackluster. They can run the ball. They're basically Iowa, but like a little better this season.
Oh, wow. That's almost an indictment because obviously we've talked about Iowa and their offensive
Iowa won 10
deficiencies,
games last year.
I know they
So
did, but see, there's that funny thing about Iowa is they always give you enough hope, but then always finish at like number 23 because their offense is just not good enough to score more points. But they can't blame it on Brian Ferentz this year. It kind of just is. And there's no hate at Iowa. I mean, their defense is it's outstanding, and it always usually is outstanding. So good for them. All right, look, last time you were on here, you did your top 5 favorite fan bases. Now, we've already talked about some of the hate. And last year, I think UNC was on there because you weren't a big Drake May guy. I think you had Iowa, obviously at Boston College. So I kind of want to go over this again. I want you to give us your favorite fan bases right now based off of the interaction that you have had with them throughout the course of the offseason and now.
yes, my 5 fan bases that are most near and dear to my heart. In 5th place of the 5, I would go with Cincinnati. The Bearcats fans were just so frustratingly annoying this offseason, and I do not know what gave them the confidence to do so. And I can't even remember. It was like they would get upset if like Brennan Sorsby wasn't ranked as like a top 4 quarterback in the Big 12.
Love it.
They were upset with me using On3's transfer portal rankings where Sorsby was ranked as like the 72nd best quarterback in the portal. And they were like, you should use 247 because he's number 27 in there or whatever. So thank you, Falcon Snake. I appreciate the support with the Cincy and the vomiting emoji. But I'm buddies with I've got a buddy named Matt, another Matt, Spawn Hour. You may have seen his stuff, but he's a big Cincinnati guy. So I've got some sympathy for them, but I certainly had to put some fans in their place this offseason. Some wonderful interactions there with people. But what I will say, I'm conflicted about this one, and this is why I included it. I met Scott Satterfield at Big 12 Media Days, and it wasn't like I asked him a question either. It was like I just ran into him and we had a conversation and we talked. Seems like a great guy. And I genuinely wish nothing for the best for them. Want them to win every game this season. But man, those fans were just pushing my buttons this offseason.
That's you can pick that name up off the floor a little bit later as you go through your rankings. That was really good. I love you guys, but I love your coach more.
Yeah, exactly. Number 4, UCLA.
Really?
I was very vocal this offseason about how I thought they were going to be one of the worst power conference teams just because the Deshaun Foster hire I was really puzzled by. And then there was that whole podium thing. And I was just like, I don't know, with their roster talent and where they're at and in the Big Ten, and every home game is going to be a road game essentially because the Big Ten teams are just going to come pack the Rose Bowl. I just had no confidence in them. And I just remember a very large chunk of UCLA faithful essentially thinking they're just going to pick up where they left off, that it's an upgrade from Chip Kelly and that, Foster's a real people's coach. So
That's never so I feel like that's never really a great sign whenever they say the players coach. In today's world, it's hard because I think there's a hard line that you have to find about being a coach, but also being knowing or being willing to sort of acquiesce to the way that younger people are in the world today. But whenever they say players coach, I'm always nervous. I mean, you see this in the NFL a lot where the guys come in, I'm all about the players, and then they lose, and it's like, well, players hate you, the fans hate you, and the ownership hates you. So it's something's got to give.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the video. A lot of people were pointing to there was a video of the UCLA locker room reacting to the Deshaun Foster hire, and they were all like celebrating.
Yeah,
And I'm like, did you see who they like? That's a 5-7 roster celebrating his hire. Like, I don't know if I'd be too thrilled about that. I'd be like, I don't think this team knows who's going to be put us in the best position to win. And if you think about it, with an internal hire, yeah, if I play receiver for UCLA and my receiver coach gets the head coaching job, I'm going to be excited for him.
sure.
But, to each their own.
That's right. Number 3.
Yeah. Spoiler, top 3 spots, all occupied by ACC fan bases.
Yes.
They just kill it. We have number 3 is Louisville.
Ooh.
I love Louisville, and I had a friendship with Louisville Boston College, or not Boston College. Maybe I'm spoiling later in this. Louisville Barstool, I should say. I had a friendship with them last season. I said they could be a sleeper for the ACC title, and I was really banging that drum. That ended up happening, and I feel like I had a really good relationship with them. And this is from literally last week. I picked Georgia Tech to beat Louisville solely because Brent Key was 5-0 versus ranked ACC opponents, and I was just like, I'm going to ride with the stat. Why not? And then I had to have been like 20 Louisville fans in my mentions saying calling me a fraud and all this stuff. So I activated Boston College protocol on Louisville the other day, which was a little childish, but necessary.
Not childish at all. This is what we have to do to survive.
It is. I'm out here fighting for my life.
Yes, as you should. Don't give Tyler a lot of hate. He's just trying to make some content. He just loves some ball.
It's true. But remember, this is my favorite fan bases.
I agree. I know.
So This is making amends. Number two,
top 5 programs and fan bases Tyler will be sending a Christmas card to. How's that?
100%. The
right,
contents of the Christmas card won't be revealed. But number 2 might surprise you. It actually is a shocker. It is Boston College. And the reason Boston College is not number 1 right now is because they might actually be kind of good this year.
Yeah.
And I feel like that has made them just ever so slightly less toxic. Some of them have kind of embraced the slander a little bit. I've had a lot more Boston College fans sort of rocking with the joke and just going with it, and it's just an overall slightly less toxic environment. The Patriots are doing all right. I think the Red Sox might be in the playoff race still. The Patriots aren't doing all right. That's a little bit of an overstatement. At least they've got a new direction or whatever. So everyone in the city of Boston, they won a championship with the Celtics. So everyone's feeling a little bit more relaxed, and it feels like they've cooled off a little.
That is fair. And I think that Bill O'Brien you take a guy who has the kind of experience that he has, right, coaching. And I firmly believe anyway, that when you have a coach who has seen so many different things, they have a step up over guys that are maybe just kind of trying to find their footing as a head coach. And Bill O'Brien has done some pretty elite coaching at the highest level in the NFL. I mean, he was Tom Brady's offensive coordinator. So you work with the best, and he went there. Now, I will say this, though. He did say that being the head coach of Boston College was a dream job. And I'm like, he's lying to me because nobody has ever said that.
The second he gets a better offer, he's out of there. Yeah.
100%. So can I guess number 1?
Yeah,
I'm going to try to guess number 1 because last year I remember you had some back and forth with this program, but I don't think it's still true. Is it the Pitt Panthers?
It is actually not the Pitt Panthers.
Oh, okay. All
but right. I'd say still an honorable mention. But Pitt fans kind of knew their place because last season I said I think they might struggle, and they were like, we are not going to struggle because they were coming off an 8-win season. They went 3-9, so they're a little more subdued this season.
All right, fair.
It's the Syracuse Orange at number 1. Something happened this offseason, and the perfect combination of such a massive market like Syracuse and the media hype that came with the hiring of Fran Brown and the portal additions and Kyle McCord, and just hundreds upon hundreds of Syracuse fans from the woodworks whenever I posted anything that had Syracuse anywhere near it or mentioned on it, just flooding in. And if it wasn't the most glowing review, just praising every aspect of Syracuse, like I think I had Syracuse at like 7th or like probably 7th in my preseason ACC power rankings, pretty significantly higher. I think in the media poll, they were picked like 12th.
Yep.
And I was getting called a fraud and a loser and and I was just like, what? Are you guys seeing something here that I'm not? Like, just wild stuff like that. Syracuse takes the cake. The big one, the big clash was I had Kyle McCord at like 10th in the ACC quarterback power rankings that I put out.
That's
and
not. He's looked good.
He's actually looked really good, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they got especially fuming at that. I just had the most vile thing said to me that I've been said all off season. And to the point where the guy who runs the Locked On Syracuse account challenged me publicly to come onto his podcast and debate him about ranking Kyle McCord. And I was like, all right, sure. So I came onto his podcast and went well. He didn't really know what he was talking about, but it was just the culmination of a Syracuse flood that occurred in the offseason, basically.
I love people like that who challenge you. Like, we ask you on here because we want to have a little bit of fun. We want to let loose a little bit, talk some college football. We're not challenging you because we don't have the credentials to challenge you. Like, we don't do the research. I love people who are like, come on. And then you give them your researched, reasonable takes, and they still don't care because they just want to be homers.
He didn't know who Lance Leipold was. He didn't know. I think he didn't know who like Tyler Shuck was, like Louisville's quarterback. It was kind of ugly, but you know.
Hey, good for you. So Cincinnati, UCLA, Louisville, Boston College, Syracuse, ACC heavy as it should be. All right, my man. So do you feel like taking some questions?
Yeah, I'm down. Let's do it.
All right. So first of all, we have, I think it's Jack Quack. Yo, what's your thoughts on the Heisman race? Who you got?
I haven't made an extensive video on this, and admittedly, I haven't like gone into the weeds on data, and I've done that intentionally because I always feel like the Heisman race isn't fully developed enough until we're like at least 5 or 6 weeks into the season. But based on what people and teams have done so far, I feel like Cam Ward is electric to watch. He's got to be up there near the top. Ollie Gordon's completely out. Ashton Genty is in. As far as talk, and I think he could make it a compelling case for a Group of 5 player, the most compelling one we've seen in a long time, which is an exciting thing. And then I haven't tracked what Teteroa McMillan's stat lines have been recently, but I know he had that insane one early in the season versus New Mexico. So I'd like to think he's probably the top wide receiver right now. If not him, maybe we're talking about Ryan Williams at Alabama, although I'm not sure he has quite the numbers to back that up yet. Like I said, I'm not too in depth on that, but there's a few names to look out for. I think Ward is the face of the Heisman race right now, though.
He has to, and Mario Cristobal is thanking his lucky stars that he finally got the stars to align, because if they had another season that has looked the way that it's looked, we're going to be talking about, is Mario in trouble? Because I think even last year we talked about it, that remember the kneel down that was not a kneel down. My goodness, that was a disaster. But they have put it together, and they have that swag, something that Brad always says that the U needs. Coral Gables needs to be swaggy the way that it used to be, and they kind of do feel that way. So there you go. All right. Second question from, let's see, I don't even know how to say that, but my please lot. Will Indiana make a bowl game?
Mr. Pies a lot, I think. I'll say, yeah, Indiana will make a bowl game only because statistically that seems likely. They're 4-0. They need 2 more wins. Sure, I think that'll happen. Will they go much beyond that, much further than that? I don't think so. I expressed my thoughts on Indiana before. They definitely have a firm ceiling. I would say they can't make the playoffs this year. It's not going to happen. Top tier, the Big Ten is too tough. I see Brad coming in.
Yes, coming in the chat there. I was going to get to that. Yes, for all of you who are uninitiated, Brad is my co-host who normally would be sitting where Tyler is sitting now, and he is apparently at the Polynesian Resort at Disney World having a great time, wasting his time listening to me, but not wasting his time listening to you. So we always give a shout out to Brad because he shows up every week, and I appreciate his friendship and all that good stuff. So Indiana to make a bowl game. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, here we go. My favorite team. Do you think West Virginia is going to be good? From Joshua Jones.
I think West Virginia can recover their season, and I definitely think there's room for them to do something in the Big 12. It was in a gutsy win against Kansas. Penn State's obviously a great team. The Pitt game's a rivalry game. It was a come from behind victory. Definitely still a lot of room for West Virginia to turn in a nice season, and don't sell your Neil Brown stock just yet.
All right. I just want to take this comment from Falcon Snake. Nobody ever wants to live in Boston. My father would highly disagree with you on that because that's all he talks about is living in the greater Boston area. Okay. So we're getting close to the end here, but we got some games that I think we should talk about. We did get a text message that asked for your thoughts on Alabama, Georgia. That's obviously the game everybody's talking about.
Yeah, Alabama, Georgia, game of the year. I've heard people calling it a one-game season, and that's what it feels like. That's what's just so glorious about it. There could be no playoff, there could be no postseason, and this game would still feel just as big as it is. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful. Uh, and I look at this game, and I feel like a pretty big question is was it Alabama that had Kirby's number, or was it Nick Saban that had Kirby's number?
Yep.
And now we're talking about the DeBoer versus Saban thing. And for me, I look at Kalen DeBoer and I say, every time I've doubted this man and every time they've been underdogs, I've seen him just go out and do something crazy. I watched him do it versus the Ducks twice last season, where it was just like everything was like Ducks are winning. Ducks are winning. They're more talented. They have better players, all this stuff. And he goes out and beats them. I really Georgia also has some pretty big injuries right now. Like Tate Ratledge went down in the Kentucky game. That's one of their best offensive linemen. They're a depleted team, and Bama's shown a ton of explosivity. So I like Bama in this game, and I'm rocking with the Crimson Tide at home.
I said last week that Bama might be the sneakiest, best team in the country because of how they've looked, and I think we've all been surprised. But again, you keep Jalen Milroe, who is a guy who was playing so well at the end of last year, and obviously the Rose Bowl game was not quite the game I think he wanted to have played. But you bring in and you keep veteran leadership at the quarterback position, it makes it a lot easier, especially with the turnover of a coach. And I don't think they lost a ton of guys the way that they would have, but I like where your head's at about Saban and not being there because Kirby Smart, I mean, he has beaten Nick Saban before, obviously, but this is a little bit different now. And I think that this, to me, is a game that you'll feel like Kalen DeBoer is going to find out how well his team responds and how well he can respond and what it's got to be. I mean, yes, he coached in the national championship game, but Alabama, Georgia is just a different level in the regular season. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is such a different energy around this game.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So you kind of spoiled this earlier. Illinois, Penn State. I think you said that Penn State was going to just mop the floor with them, but do you have any other thoughts besides that?
I just think beating Nebraska is one thing. Beating Penn State is a whole nother animal that Illinois is just not ready for. They're not up to the task.
All right, that's fair enough. Let's see. Another fan base that probably is going to be on your shit list very soon, Louisville and Notre Dame. Now, this is interesting because Notre Dame shouldn't be in this position. They obviously lost to Northern Illinois. Louisville, you like. So where do you see this game going? I know this game worries Coach a lot.
It should. All signs point to that 66-point outburst versus Purdue as an exception to the rule that is bad offense for Notre Dame this season. It's been extremely just disappointing to see this year. And I like Louisville. I think Louisville can cook offensively. I'm not sure if they're favored in this game. I think it'll be close, but I just think Notre Dame just has a bad feel to them this season. They kind of feel like Clemson felt last season, which was the parallel I used in the offseason, where offensively you're waiting for guys to step up and it's not happening. The skill players aren't there. At quarterback, it's lackluster. They have a shiny new offensive coordinator and Mike Denbrock. It feels like things should be working and they're not. It's the same exact vibe. And so I think Louisville will get it done.
All right, some games that you're interested in that I think everybody else will be. Wazoo, Boise State.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the Wazoo story, and then Boise State's so intriguing with the Genty Heisman campaign and close loss to the Ducks. It feels like could be like a playoff knockout game here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna definitely rock with the Broncos on the blue turf, but this is the type of game where if Wazoo wins this game, that's kind of like the oh crap moment of like Wazoo could be legit.
Mike Gundy, who is now over 50, closer to 60 than he is 40, Oklahoma State and Kansas State.
I think I hurt Brad with that Louisville pick. I
Don't worry
apologize to
about it.
him.
Don't worry about him. He's
But
in the happiest place
yeah,
on earth.
I'm really. You're right. You're right. You can't be sad
Yeah.
there.
Nope. Nope.
I'm really intrigued by this game. I think I am than a good chunk of people just because they both just lost. But it's like, how do you bounce back from a loss? Can you recover? I like Kansas State at home. I think that they just went into a hornet's nest in Lavelle Edwards Stadium and they just got bopped in the face and couldn't recover. I think at home they're going to be able to stay on schedule, keep Avery Johnson calm, beat Oklahoma State, who's just not very good this season. Their O-line's bad. They can't run the football. Their quarterback's turnover prone. They're running out of options. But who knows? Mike Gundy blood magic is always a thing, and he could just absolutely pull a rabbit out of a hat here.
Yeah, Mike Gundy's one of those. He's like the Wild West. You just never know what you're going to get out of him. And he's been there forever. So obviously he has a lot of wins to go along with that time.
Yeah, for all you know, he could be driving drunk to the game based on his.
Oh, come on. Yeah, but you're not wrong. That was back in his mullet days. I think he's kind of shaved some things off and he has a more reasonable looking haircut, I think. Maybe not. Maybe he'll bring the mullet back. All right, Texas State, Sam Houston.
Yeah, I put this one there because I think it's kind of flying under the radar. I just really wanted to shout out Sam Houston. They've quietly been actually pretty good. Like they beat Rice pretty soundly earlier this season, I think on the road. And then the other one that they just got was they torched New Mexico State. And not a terrible New Mexico State team. We're talking about a different standard of play. Like they're a good CUSA team, probably would be a mid or bad like Mountain West team. But I think Sam Houston's a fun little story. They could contend in that conference this year. And them hosting Texas State is really fun. I'm really high on Texas State. I think they'll probably win this game and roll in this game. But I just think it's an intriguing, fun one to think about in the state of Texas. Who knows? Maybe something fun could happen here and we could, have a close, good game.
Who's on upset alert this week? High alert.
High upset alert. I would say LSU plays South Alabama. South Alabama dropped 87 versus an FCS school and then 66 last week versus App State. Quarterback Gio Lopez is back. I'm just saying LSU's had a bit of weird stuff happen to them this year,
yes.
Including that South Carolina game. I would just keep an eye on that one. That's all I'm saying. I'm not making any crazy predictions.
Wow, that's a big one.
Texas A&M against Arkansas in Dallas. Why is Texas A&M still ranked? I don't know. Could be SEC bias. Arkansas is kind of a fun little story. If they can avoid turning the football over, they just beat Auburn in a conference game. I would keep my eye on that. Technically, it would be a top 25 upset. BYU travels on the road to play Baylor, coming off of a big time win. They're a top 25 team now.
I saw that.
Wacky stuff can happen in Waco, so who knows?
Certainly. I think the whole point is there's always games every single week that people should be looking to that don't just have numbers next to them. There's so many great games that end up happening. Unfortunately, it's hard to find them all because there's just so much to have. And I wish they could do something for people like me, like a red zone for college football, so that you could get a little bit more of a flavor of a lot of the games. And I know that really helps to be able to be familiar, be able to catch it. And then if a ton of things are happening in a game, you could flip over to the game and be able to see it. But that's a pie in the sky idea. All right. So this is something that we don't usually do around here, but obviously I want to put you on the spot. Tyler, I need you to give me the hottest of takes.
Hottest of takes.
Just go nuts.
There is a team that exists in the ACC that has 2 victories over power conference opponents this season, a top 10 victory, a win over an undefeated team last week. They're 3-1 overall. And this week they're hosting a lowly CUSA team. That team is the Boston College Eagles hosting Western Kentucky. They're about a 13.5 point favorite in that game. And I'm going to say Western Kentucky beats Boston College outright on the road.
Wow.
And gets the win.
You're doing that just because Boston College is going to be all over you for that. I will promise to, one, not accidentally click our video intro when we do that, but also maybe even to clip this. So your extremely hot take is Western Kentucky, the Hilltoppers, over Boston College. And you know what? You'll have fun if that happens because
I'll have a great time.
You'll have an absolutely great time. I have had a great time. So a couple of administrative things before we get everybody out of here. We did get a question about where to find Budge's Instagram. So all of that is linked in the show notes right now at CF Budge, I believe on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube if you want to find him there. So if you need to find him in some way, those are all the places to find him. Again, it's linked in the show notes right now, and it will be linked there for all the audio people who listen to this after the fact. Also, Budge, there's something that we do have one more question about I think is Duke going bowling this year? And I believe that is your stop on the Budge tour this year or this week.
It is Duke, North Carolina, in Durham. Going to be fun. I'm very excited. Going to go with my brother. He lives in North Carolina right now, so just going to see him. Going to that game will be a lot of fun. It's not going to be my last trip there either. I've got another one planned a little further later on in the season. But I was idle last week. I didn't go to a game last week, so I'm pretty hyped.
So what do you do when you're idle? That feels like torture for you.
Just basically, I mean, it's not torture. It's basically just what I used to do, 14 hours straight on college football. Yep. My girlfriend gets a little concerned for me, and it's a good time.
Hey, that's totally fair. So a couple of comments. Obviously, breaking news, Boston College hate returns once again. Sad day for all the people in the greater Boston area, but we're going to end on this note. CF Budge, I love you. And I think that is a great way to end. Yes, heart emojis all over the place. Wow. Yeah, exactly. You know where to find Tyler Budge now. Tyler, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. But if you want to know anything about us, you can find us at INC Sports, Iceman and Coach, whether you listen to us, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. I hate plugging that stuff. If you enjoyed our content here, even though Tyler will not be here next week, you can always hit subscribe on YouTube. It would make us a little bit happy, but it's not a requirement. We come out with content every single week. So, Budge, do you have anything that you'd like to say to everybody before we sign off and you can get on to your trip to Durham?
It's true. It's true. Got a flight early tomorrow morning. The one note I would leave on would be to shed some light on the group of five, because we didn't quite touch on it, but UNLV, Fresno State, Texas State, Sam Houston, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, South Florida, Tulane, Liberty, App State, UTSA, East Carolina. These games can fall between the cracks, and not everyone's going to see them, but keep an eye on those games, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised this weekend. It's going to be full, jam-packed college football fun, and I'm very excited.
You heard the man. I couldn't say it better myself. I hope this finds everybody well, as I always do. I hope this finds everybody safe. Budge, we'll see you down the road. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time. This is Football Frenzy.